The war room on Space Station Alpha was quiet except for the soft hum of computers. Ambassador Kyle Morrison stared at the holographic display showing the latest battle reports. Red marks covered entire star systems where fighting had destroyed everything. The numbers were getting worse every day. 300 years, Kyle said to himself. 300 years of this madness. Commander Lisa Brooks walked into the room carrying a tablet full of new reports. Her face looked tired. She had been trying to make peace between the Vorthak and Zelani for 5 years now. Every attempt had failed. The Meridian just returned from the Kepler system, Lisa said. The Vorthak destroyed another Zelani temple world. The Zelani responded by wiping out a Vorthak mining colony. 50 million dead on each side. Kyle rubbed his forehead. The headaches were getting worse. Every diplomatic mission ended the same way. The two alien races would listen politely to peace offers, then go right back to killing each other. The Vorthak were strange creatures that looked like walking crystals. Their bodies were made of living diamond and they could survive in space without protection. They were proud warriors who valued honor above everything else. They had been fighting for so long that war had become their religion. The Zelani were even stranger. They had no physical bodies at all. They were beings of pure energy that lived inside robot shells. They could move from one robot body to another instantly. Death meant nothing to them because they could always find a new body. This made them fearless in battle. Captain Greg Turner's voice came through the communication system. Ambassador Morrison, we have another refugee convoy approaching. 200 ships carrying civilians from the war zone. Kyle sighed. The refugee problem was getting out of control. Every week, more ships filled with scared families arrived at human space stations. They had nowhere else to go. The war had spread so far that even neutral worlds were not safe anymore. How many this time? Kyle asked. About 3 million people, Greg replied. They're from 6 different species. The fighting in their home systems got so bad that they had to evacuate entire planets. Lisa shook her head. Where are we going to put them all? Our refugee camps are already overcrowded. The truth was that the Galactic Council had run out of ideas. For decades, they had tried everything they could think of. Economic sanctions did not work because both sides could make everything they needed to fight. Military blockades failed because the Vorthak and Zelani had weapons that could destroy entire fleets in minutes. Some council members had even tried using time travel to prevent the war from starting. That had made things worse. Every change to the past had created new reasons for the two races to hate each other. Admiral Helen Price had spent her entire career studying galactic warfare. She had written books about strategy and tactics that were taught in military schools across the galaxy, but this war made no sense to her. They're not fighting for territory anymore, Helen explained to Kyle during their weekly briefing. They're not fighting for resources or trade routes. They're fighting because their ancestors fought. It's become a tradition that neither side can break. Dr. Nathan Ward was humanities expert on alien psychology. He had spent months studying recordings of Vorthak and Zelani battles. What he discovered was disturbing. Both species are trapped, Nathan told the council. The Vorthak have a code of honor that forces them to respond to every attack with a bigger attack. They cannot back down without losing face. The Zelani believe that every battle is a sacred ritual. They think their energy forms become stronger through combat. Kyle looked at the star map again. The red zones were spreading like a disease. Neutral systems were being drawn into the conflict. Trade routes were being destroyed. Entire civilizations were choosing sides or fleeing to distant galaxies. The worst part was that both sides were getting more creative with their weapons. The Vorthak had developed bombs that could crack planets in half. The Zelani had learned to possess entire star systems, turning them into weapons against their enemies. We need a new approach, Kyle said. Everything we've tried has failed. Traditional diplomacy, economic pressure, military intervention, even temporal manipulation. Nothing works, Lisa nodded. The problem is that we're thinking like civilized beings. But this isn't a civilized war anymore. It's become something primal, something beyond reason. Outside the station's windows, another convoy of refugee ships was arriving. Kyle could see families pressed against the portholes, looking for their first glimpse of safety in years. Children who had never known peace. Parents who had lost everything. The communication system crackled to life again. This time it was Admiral Price calling from the council headquarters. Kyle, we need to talk, Helen said. The council has made a decision. We're calling in the humans. Kyle felt his heart skip a beat. Humanity was the newest member of the Galactic Council. They had only been in space for 2 centuries. Their technology was primitive compared to most galactic civilizations. Their weapons were simple and crude. "Are you sure about this?" Kyle asked. "We're talking about a war that has stumped the greatest military minds in the galaxy. What can humans possibly do that we haven't already tried?"
"Maybe that's exactly what we need," Helen replied.
Fresh thinking. A completely different approach. The humans don't know that this war is supposed to be impossible to stop. Maybe that ignorance will be an advantage. Lisa looked skeptical. Human weapons are barely more advanced than throwing rocks. Their ships are slow and clumsy. How are they supposed to stop energy beings and crystal warriors? Nathan Ward had been quiet during the conversation, but now he spoke up. "There's something about humans that makes them different. I've been studying their history. They fought thousands of wars on their home planet, but they always found ways to end them. They have experience with conflicts that seem hopeless." Kyle thought about this. Earth's history was full of terrible wars, but humans had always found ways to make peace eventually. They understood something about conflict that older civilizations had forgotten. "What makes you think they'll succeed where we've failed?" Kyle asked. "Because they fight to win," Nathan said. "Most galactic species fight for honor or glory or religious reasons. Humans fight to end wars. That's a very different mindset." The decision was made. Humanity would be asked to intervene in the Vorthak-Zilani War. Kyle wondered if this was the beginning of a solution or just another disaster waiting to happen. Either way, 300 years of failure had to end somehow. President Matthew Kane sat in the Oval Office reading the most unusual request in human history. The message had come directly from the Galactic Council headquarters, marked with the highest priority codes. They were asking Earth to stop a war that had been raging for 3 centuries. "They must be desperate," Matthew said to his chief of staff. "The Council has never asked us for military help before. Usually they treat us like children who just learned to walk." The request was formal but urgent. Every other option had been tried. Economic sanctions, military blockades, diplomatic missions, even attempts to rewrite history itself. Nothing had worked. The Vorthak-Zilani War was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. General Patricia Stone arrived at the White House within an hour of the Council's message. She carried briefing files that contained everything humanity knew about the conflict. The information was disturbing. "The enemy forces are beyond anything we've ever faced," Patricia explained to the president. "The Vorthak can survive in the vacuum of space. Their crystal bodies can withstand temperatures that would melt our ships. They have weapons that can shatter moons." She opened another file. "The Zilani are worse in some ways. They're energy beings with no physical form. They can possess our computer systems and turn our own weapons against us. They can move faster than light without needing ships." Matthew looked at the tactical reports. Human technology seemed laughably primitive compared to what these aliens could do. Earth's best warships were made of steel and plastic. Their weapons fired metal bullets or simple explosives. How could such basic tools defeat enemies who manipulated energy and matter like gods? Admiral Jake Collins had been studying the problem for weeks. He was known throughout the military as a strategic genius who could find solutions to impossible situations, but even he seemed stumped by this challenge. "Sir, I'll be honest with you," Jake said during the emergency meeting. "On paper, we don't stand a chance. Their technology is thousands of years ahead of ours. Their weapons can destroy planets. Their defenses can stop anything we can throw at them." "But?" Matthew asked, sensing there was more. "But wars aren't won on paper," Jake continued. "They're won by thinking differently than your enemy expects. The Council has been fighting this war using galactic standards and galactic thinking. Maybe that's the problem." Colonel Mary Johnson had spent days analyzing combat footage from the war zone. She was a tactical expert who specialized in understanding enemy behavior patterns. What she had discovered was interesting. "Both sides fight in very predictable ways," Mary explained. "The Vorthak follow ancient warrior codes that haven't changed in thousands of years. They always respond to attacks in the same manner. Their battle plans are based on honor and tradition, not effectiveness." She brought up another display. "The Zilani are just as predictable. As energy beings, they can't understand physical warfare. They fight like they're still in their original dimension. They use the same tactics over and over because they can't imagine anything different." This gave Commander Rick Davis an idea. Rick was known for unconventional thinking. He had solved several military problems by approaching them from completely unexpected angles. What if their predictability is their weakness? Rick suggested. They've been fighting each other for so long that they only know how to counter each other's tactics. They've never faced anything truly different. The room fell silent as everyone considered this possibility. It was true that both alien races had focused entirely on countering each other's abilities. The Vorthak had developed weapons specifically designed to disrupt energy beings. The Zilani had created attacks that could shatter crystal structures. But neither side had prepared for something completely outside their experience. You're suggesting we use our primitive technology as an advantage? Patricia asked. Exactly, Rick replied. Our weapons are so basic that their defensive systems won't even recognize them as threats. When was the last time a galactic civilization worried about being hit by a chunk of metal, moving really fast? Matthew was beginning to see the logic. Throughout human history, advanced civilizations had been defeated by simpler ones who fought differently. The Romans lost to barbarian tribes who didn't follow classical military doctrine. Modern armies had been stymied by guerrilla fighters using primitive weapons and unconventional tactics. Dr. Sarah Williams was Earth's leading expert on xenobiology. She had studied every alien species that humanity had encountered. Her analysis of the Vorthak and Zilani was crucial to understanding their weaknesses. The Vorthak think in very rigid patterns, Sarah explained. Their crystal matrix brains process information differently than organic minds. They're extremely logical but very slow to adapt to new situations. If we can present them with something outside their experience, they won't know how to respond quickly. What about the Zilani? Matthew asked. They're almost the opposite problem, Sarah continued. As energy beings, they exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But that also means they have trouble focusing on simple, three-dimensional problems. They overthink everything. The plan was starting to take shape. Instead of trying to match the aliens' advanced technology, humanity would use its own strengths. Human weapons were crude but reliable. Human tactics were simple but adaptable. Most importantly, human thinking was unpredictable because humans were still young enough to be creative. Admiral Collins outlined the strategy. We don't try to out-tech them. We outthink them. We use weapons and tactics that are so basic they won't see them coming. We fight a three-dimensional war while they're prepared for four-dimensional combat. What kind of weapons are we talking about? Matthew asked. Kinetic weapons, Patricia answered. Railguns that fire solid metal projectiles. Chemical explosives that create physical shockwaves. Electromagnetic pulse weapons that disrupt electronics through brute force rather than sophisticated hacking. Rick added his own ideas. We also use our greatest advantage, unpredictability. Instead of following standard military doctrine, we improvise. We adapt. We do things that don't make sense to logical minds. The president considered everything he had heard. It was a huge risk. If humanity failed, Earth could become a target for both alien races. But if they succeeded, they could end a war that had consumed the galaxy for centuries. What do you need? Matthew asked. Time to prepare, Jake replied. Our existing fleet isn't ready for this kind of mission. We need to modify our ships and weapons for this specific threat. We also need to train our crews for combat against enemies unlike anything they've ever faced. How long? The president asked. 6 months minimum, Patricia said. We're not just preparing for a battle. We're preparing to think and fight in ways that have never been tried before. Matthew made his decision. Do it. Prepare the fleet. Train the crews. Design the weapons. Humanity is going to war. As the meeting ended and the military leaders left to begin their preparations, Matthew stood alone in the Oval Office. Through the windows, he could see ordinary people going about their daily lives, unaware that their species had just accepted the most dangerous mission in galactic history. The war that had consumed the galaxy for 3 centuries was about to meet humanity's machines of war. Admiral Janet Miller stood on the bridge of the UES Titan as the human fleet entered the war zone. Around her, screens showed the positions of alien ships locked in their eternal battle. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. Energy beams crossed space like deadly rainbows while crystal ships exploded into diamond dust. This is it, Janet said to her crew. 300 years of war ends today, one way or another. The human fleet looked nothing like the sleek vessels of galactic civilization. Where alien ships were smooth curves of energy and crystal, human ships were angular blocks of steel and ceramic. They bristled with weapon turrets, sensor arrays, and communication equipment. To alien eyes, they looked like flying factories. Captain Steve Parker commanded the UES Hammer, a heavy cruiser designed specifically for this mission. His ship was covered in thick armor plating that could withstand direct hits from energy weapons. More importantly, it was built with mechanical systems that couldn't be hacked or possessed by energy beings. "All stations report ready," Steve announced to his crew. "Remember, we're not trying to out-tech them. We're trying to outthink them." Lieutenant Commander Rachel Green coordinated the fleet's movements from the UES Anvil. Her ship was equipped with the most advanced computers that humanity could build, but they were deliberately simple computers. Instead of quantum processors that thought in multiple dimensions, they used basic electronic circuits that worked in straight lines. "Enemy vessels are approaching," Rachel reported. "Vorthak crystal ships on the port side. Zilani energy forms on starboard. They don't seem to know what to make of us." The aliens had good reason to be confused. Human ships didn't match any known design patterns. They didn't use energy shields that could be disrupted or quantum drives that could be manipulated. Instead, they relied on thick metal armor and simple chemical rockets for movement. Dr. Amanda Clark watched the alien reactions from her position as fleet observer. She had spent months studying both species, trying to understand how they thought and fought. What she saw now confirmed her theories. "The Vorthak are scanning us with every sensor they have," Amanda reported. "Their computers can't classify our ships. We don't fit into any category they understand." On the other side of the fleet, the Zilani were having similar problems. As energy beings, they were used to dealing with sophisticated technology they could interface with directly. Human ships were too primitive for them to possess or control. "Admiral, both sides are requesting communication," the communications officer reported. "Put them through," Janet replied. The main screen split to show representatives of both alien races. The Vorthak appeared as a tall figure made of living crystal, light refracting through its body in complex patterns. The Zilani was a shifting form of pure energy contained within a robotic shell. "Unknown vessels," the Vorthak spoke in a voice like breaking glass. "You enter a sacred battlefield. This conflict does not concern your species. Withdraw immediately." The Zilani's voice was like music made of electricity. "Primitive beings, your simple minds cannot comprehend the complexities of this war. Leave now before you are accidentally destroyed." Janet smiled grimly. Both aliens were making the same mistake. They were dismissing humanity because human technology looked crude. They couldn't imagine that crude could be effective. "This is Admiral Miller of the Earth Defense Force," she replied. "We're here to end this war. You can surrender now, or we can do this the hard way." Both aliens seemed shocked by the response. The Vorthak's crystal body flashed with angry colors. The Zilani's energy form flickered with what might have been amusement. "You dare threaten us?" the Vorthak demanded. "We who have fought for 3 centuries? We who command the power of stars? Your primitive weapons cannot harm beings of pure energy," the Zilani added. "We exist beyond your physical dimension." Janet nodded to her weapons officer. "Show them how wrong they are." The human fleet opened fire simultaneously. Instead of energy beams or exotic particles, they launched simple metal projectiles at incredible speeds. Railgun rounds tore through space like angry meteors, moving too fast for most defensive systems to track. The Vorthak ships tried to activate their energy shields, but the shields were designed to stop energy attacks. Solid metal moving at near light speed passed right through them like they weren't there. Crystal hulls that could withstand plasma cannons shattered like glass when hit by kinetic rounds. The Zilani fared even worse. As energy beings, they had no experience with purely physical attacks. When electromagnetic pulse missiles exploded near their ships, the crude electrical interference disrupted their ability to maintain coherent form. For the first time in centuries, Zilani were being forced back into their robot bodies. Sergeant Major Tony Lee watched the battle from the hangar bay of his transport ship. His Marines were preparing for ground combat, but the space battle was going better than anyone had expected. "Look at that," Tony said to his squad leaders. "Our dumb rocks are beating their smart rays." It was true. The aliens' sophisticated weapons couldn't lock onto targets that didn't emit energy signatures. Their quantum computers couldn't calculate the paths of simple ballistic projectiles. Their advanced defensive systems were designed for threats that no longer existed. Captain Steve Parker's tactical display showed the chaos spreading through both alien fleets. Ships were colliding with each other as their crews panicked. Weapon systems were firing wildly at targets they couldn't identify. Command structures were breaking down as officers tried to understand what was happening. "This is incredible," Steve reported to the fleet. "They're so advanced that they've forgotten how to fight simple wars." The battle turned into a rout within hours. Human ships moved through the alien fleets like wolves among sheep. Every human weapon was designed with one purpose: to end fights quickly and decisively. There was no elegance, no honor, no sacred ritual. Just brutal efficiency. Dr. Amanda Clark documented the psychological impact on both alien species. They're experiencing combat shock, she reported. For 3 centuries, they've fought according to predictable rules. Now they're facing something completely outside their experience. The Vorthak began retreating first. Their warrior code demanded honorable combat, but there was no honor in being destroyed by primitive weapons they couldn't counter. Their crystal ships fled toward their home systems, broadcasting confused messages about human treachery. The Zilani lasted longer, but only because they couldn't believe what was happening. As beings of pure thought, they kept trying to analyze human tactics using logic that no longer applied. When they finally understood that crude was defeating sophisticated, they too began to withdraw. Admiral Janet Miller watched both alien fleets fleeing in opposite directions. For the first time in 3 centuries, the war zone was quiet. Human ships moved among the debris, rescuing survivors and securing abandoned vessels. Admiral, Rachel Green reported from the Anvil, "We're receiving surrender offers from both sides." Janet wasn't surprised. Both alien races were intelligent enough to recognize defeat when they saw it. They had been so focused on countering each other's advanced abilities that they had no defense against humanity's simple approach. "Tell them we'll discuss terms," Janet replied, "but make it clear that the fighting stops now. No more battles, no more destroyed worlds, no more refugees fleeing their homes." The human fleet had done the impossible. They had stopped a war that galactic civilization couldn't end. They had succeeded not through superior technology, but through superior thinking. Sometimes the best solution to a complex problem was the simplest one, applied with enough force to make it work. As the alien fleets disappeared into hyperspace, Janet looked out at the stars that had seen 3 centuries of pointless death. Tomorrow those same stars would shine on peace. Humanity's machines of war had accomplished what the galaxy's most advanced civilizations could not. Commander Paul Young watched his destroyer squadron demonstrate something the galaxy had never seen before. His ships moved in perfect coordination, each vessel covering the weaknesses of the others. The Vorthak crystal ships tried to adapt to human tactics, but every time they adjusted to one threat, another type of weapon would hit them from a different angle. "This is called combined arms tactics," Paul explained to the alien observers who were monitoring the engagement. "We don't rely on one superweapon. We use many different weapons working together." The concept was revolutionary to galactic thinking. For millennia, alien civilizations had sought the perfect weapon or the ultimate defense. Each species developed their technology in one direction, becoming specialists in energy manipulation or quantum mechanics or crystal engineering. Humans were generalists who used whatever worked. Captain Michelle Davis had turned the concept of technological superiority upside down. Her engineering teams had deliberately installed obsolete human technology alongside their modern systems. When the Zilani tried to possess her ship's computers, they found mechanical backup systems that didn't even use electricity. "Steam power," Michelle explained to her confused crew. "When their energy beings try to take over our quantum computers, we switch to steam engines. They can't possess mechanical systems because they don't understand physical matter." The sight of human warships running on steam power while fighting energy beings was absurd, but it worked. Zilani, who could manipulate the most sophisticated quantum computers in the galaxy, were helpless against simple mechanical clockwork that ran on springs and gears. Major Andrew White had revolutionized military strategy by introducing chaos theory to warfare. Instead of following predictable battle plans, his units changed tactics randomly. Sometimes they would attack, sometimes retreat, sometimes split up, sometimes regroup. There was no pattern for enemy computers to analyze. "The key is controlled randomness," Andrew explained to his officers. "We're not being chaotic just to be confusing. We're being unpredictable in ways that still accomplish our objectives." This drove both alien species to distraction. The Vorthak war computers kept trying to predict human behavior based on logical analysis. Every time they thought they understood the pattern, humans would do something completely different. The Zilani faced the same problem from the opposite direction. Their multidimensional thinking couldn't process simple, random decisions. Colonel Sandra Lee deployed humanity's most devastating weapon: logistics. While alien fleets relied on energy collection and matter conversion that could be disrupted, human ships carried everything they needed in physical storage compartments. "We don't need exotic power sources," Sandra explained to the fleet commanders. "Our ships run on chemical fuel we can make from asteroid mining. Our weapons use simple explosives we can manufacture anywhere. Our food comes from hydroponic farms that grow real plants." This seemingly mundane advantage proved decisive. Alien fleets that lost their energy sources became helpless. Ships that couldn't convert matter into supplies were forced to retreat. But human vessels could operate independently for months, resupplying themselves from raw materials found in any star system. The war's character was changing rapidly. For the first time in centuries, both the Vorthak and Zelani were being forced to adapt their tactics. The rigid patterns that had sustained the conflict for 300 years were breaking down under pressure from human unpredictability. General Kevin Brown observed these changes from his command ship. He had studied the war's history and understood what was happening. "They're learning," he reported to Earth Command. "Both sides are starting to question their traditional approaches." The Vorthak began experimenting with new strategies that their honor codes had previously forbidden. Instead of meeting human attacks head-on, they started using hit-and-run tactics. Instead of relying solely on their crystal technology, they began incorporating captured human weapons into their arsenals. The Zelani were undergoing an even more dramatic transformation. Beings who had existed as pure energy for millions of years were being forced to think about physical reality. They started building solid ships to carry their consciousness, copying human designs because they worked better than elegant energy constructs. Dr. Emily Watson documented these changes from her research vessel. As a xenopsychologist, she understood the profound implications of what was happening. "Both species are being forced to evolve," she reported. 3 centuries of stagnant warfare are ending because humans have introduced variables they never had to consider before. The breakthrough came when a group of young Vorthak warriors approached a human patrol. Instead of attacking, they requested permission to study human tactics. They were tired of fighting a war that served no purpose except continuing itself. Lieutenant Colonel Jason Miller was commanding the patrol when the aliens made contact. "They want to learn from us," he reported to his superiors. "They're asking questions about why we fight the way we do." This was unprecedented. The Vorthak had never shown interest in foreign military doctrine. Their crystal matrix minds were supposedly incapable of understanding non-Vorthak concepts, but desperation was forcing them to expand their thinking. Similarly, a faction of Zelani began experimenting with physical existence. Instead of inhabiting robot shells temporarily, they started building permanent bodies that could interact with the material world. They wanted to understand how humans thought in 3 dimensions instead of 4. Captain Robert Lee facilitated the first direct communication between moderate factions of both alien species and human commanders. The meeting took place aboard his neutral vessel, with all weapons powered down and defensive screens lowered. "Why do you fight?" asked a young Vorthak crystalline being. "To end wars," replied Major Jennifer Hayes, speaking for the human delegation. "We fight to create peace." This concept was alien to both species. The Vorthak fought for honor and tradition. The Zelani fought because combat was a form of meditation. Neither had ever considered fighting as a means to stop fighting. "But how do you know when to stop?" asked a Zelani representative, its energy form flickering with confusion. "When our enemies can't fight anymore," Jennifer answered simply. When continuing the war becomes impossible. The aliens struggled to understand this philosophy. They were used to fighting as an ongoing process, a way of life that defined their existence. The idea of warfare as a temporary activity with a definite ending was revolutionary. Commander Laura Wright organized a demonstration that changed everything. She arranged for representatives of both alien species to observe human military exercises. What they saw challenged every assumption they had about conflict. "Watch how they train," Laura pointed out. "They practice ending battles quickly. Every tactic is designed to minimize casualties and achieve decisive victory. They're not trying to prolong combat. They're trying to finish it." The demonstration included human soldiers practicing surrender procedures, showing how to accept an enemy's capitulation and transition to peacekeeping operations. This shocked the aliens, who had no cultural framework for ending conflicts. Both species began sending delegations to study human military philosophy. They wanted to understand how a supposedly primitive species had developed such effective approaches to warfare? The answer was simpler than they expected. "We fought thousands of wars on our home planet," explained General Marcus Thompson to a mixed audience of aliens. "We learned that eternal conflict serves no one. Wars must have winners and losers, or they become meaningless destruction. The tide of the Galactic War was turning not because humans had superior weapons, but because they had superior goals. While alien civilizations fought to continue their eternal struggle, humans fought to end it decisively. For the first time in 3 centuries, both the Vorthak and Zelani were asking the same question: what would happen when the fighting stopped? Humans were ready with an answer, and both alien species were finally ready to listen. Admiral Jennifer Scott stood in the observation deck of the UES Victory, watching something that nobody had thought possible. Ships from both alien fleets were approaching under white flags of truce. For the first time in 300 years, the Vorthak and Zelani wanted to talk instead of fight. "History in the making," Jennifer said to her communications officer. "Record everything. Future generations need to see how this war finally ended." The request for negotiations had come simultaneously from both sides. Moderate factions within each species had gained control from the war leaders, who had perpetuated the conflict for centuries. They were tired of endless death and destruction that served no purpose beyond tradition. Ambassador Daniel Turner had been chosen to represent humanity in the peace talks. His experience in interspecies relations made him the logical choice, but even he was nervous about the historic responsibility. 3 centuries of hatred don't disappear overnight, Daniel explained to his diplomatic team. "We need to give them reasons to choose peace over war." The secret to human success hadn't been superior technology or overwhelming force. It had been a completely different approach to conflict resolution. Where galactic civilizations saw war as an ongoing process, humans viewed it as a problem to be solved. Captain Robert Lee had documented every engagement between human forces and the alien fleets. His reports revealed a pattern that astounded military historians across the galaxy. Human victories weren't just tactical successes. They were psychological breakthroughs that forced both sides to reconsider their fundamental assumptions about warfare. The Vorthak measured success by how honorably they fought. Robert explained to the peace negotiators, "We showed them that effectiveness matters more than honor." The Zelani thought war was a spiritual exercise. "We demonstrated that it's actually a practical problem with practical solutions." Commander Laura Wright coordinated the ceasefire that marked the official end of hostilities. Her peacekeeping forces established buffer zones using technology that both alien species found impossible to counter or manipulate. Simple kinetic barriers, chemical detection systems, and mechanical monitoring devices couldn't be hacked, subverted, or bypassed through advanced technology. "It's beautiful in its simplicity," Laura observed. "They've spent so long developing sophisticated countermeasures that they forgot how to deal with basic physical obstacles." The peace talks took place aboard the UES Peacemaker, a specially constructed vessel designed for diplomatic meetings. The ship was deliberately built using human construction methods that neither alien species could interfere with. Every system was mechanical, chemical, or electrical rather than quantum or energy-based. President Matthew Kane arrived from Earth to preside over the final negotiations. His presence emphasized humanity's commitment to ensuring that the peace would last. He brought with him a simple message that resonated with both alien species. "War is easy," Matthew told the assembled delegates. "Any species can learn to destroy. Peace is the difficult achievement. It requires wisdom, patience, and the courage to choose cooperation over conflict." Fleet Admiral Charles Martin read the terms of the agreement that would reshape galactic politics. The treaty included provisions for human oversight of the peace process, recognition of disputed territories as neutral zones, and most importantly, the establishment of joint human-alien peacekeeping forces. "Both species will contribute personnel to these mixed units," Charles explained. "Vorthak crystal warriors, Zelani energy beings, and human soldiers working together. They'll learn to see each other as allies instead of enemies." The psychological impact of human intervention extended far beyond military victory. Dr. Susan Clark's final report to the Galactic Council contained observations that would influence interspecies relations for generations. "Humanity demonstrated that technological advancement isn't everything," Susan wrote. "Sometimes the most effective solution is the simplest one, applied with sufficient determination and creativity. The signing ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy. Beings from hundreds of species watched as representatives of the Vorthak and Zelani formally ended their 3-century conflict. The moment when both aliens shook hands with human mediators marked the beginning of a new era. But the real change went deeper than diplomatic ceremonies. Both alien species had been fundamentally altered by their contact with human thinking. The Vorthak began questioning other ancient traditions that no longer served useful purposes. The Zelani started exploring physical existence and 3-dimensional problem-solving. Captain Mike Johnson commanded one of the first joint peacekeeping patrols. His crew included Vorthak crystal beings, who had learned to value efficiency over honor, and Zelani energy forms who had discovered the usefulness of physical matter. "It's amazing how quickly they adapted," Mike reported to Fleet Command. Once they understood that cooperation was more effective than competition, they embraced the concept completely. The buffer zones established by human peacekeepers became models for conflict resolution throughout the galaxy. Other species facing territorial disputes began requesting human mediation. The techniques that had ended the Vorthak-Zelani War were applied to smaller conflicts across known space. Dr. Nathan White studied the long-term implications of humanity's intervention. His research showed that the galaxy was entering a period of unprecedented peace and cooperation. The lesson learned from the ancient war was spreading. Conflicts could be ended decisively if approached with the right mindset. Humans didn't win because they were stronger, Nathan concluded. They won because they thought differently. They approached an ancient problem with fresh perspectives and simple solutions. Years later, the former war zone had become one of the most prosperous regions in the galaxy. Vorthak crystal technology combined with Zelani energy manipulation created innovations that benefited countless species. The resources that had been wasted on 3 centuries of warfare were redirected toward exploration and development. Commander Sarah Martinez commanded a research station built on one of the former battlegrounds. Her mixed crew of humans, Vorthak, and Zelani worked together on projects that would have been impossible during the war years. "My grandmother fought in the last battles of the war," Sarah told visiting dignitaries. "She always said the most important victory wasn't military. It was proving that enemies could become friends." The memorial erected at the peace signing site bore a simple inscription in the languages of all 3 species. Here ended the war that could not be stopped, until humans brought their machines of war and their wisdom of peace. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. Military academies across the galaxy began teaching the human doctrine as a new approach to conflict resolution. The principle was simple. Fight to win decisively, then work to ensure the defeated enemy becomes a future ally. Ambassador Daniel Turner, now retired, often spoke to students about the peace negotiations. His favorite lesson was about the moment when both alien species realized that humans had never intended to destroy them. "We didn't come to conquer," Daniel would explain. "We came to liberate them from a war that had become a prison. Sometimes the greatest victory is helping your enemies escape from their own limitations." The galaxy had learned a profound lesson from humanity's intervention. Advanced technology and ancient wisdom were not enough to solve every problem. Sometimes what was needed was the simple determination to think differently, to question assumptions, and to choose practical solutions over elegant theories. The war that had consumed 3 centuries was over. In its place grew a peace that would last for millennia, built on the foundation of human machines of war and the even more powerful human capacity for turning enemies into friends.